Hey everybody, welcome to Q&A with A&V. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me from New York, Amy Rosenfeld.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm well, and how about yourself?
I'm good. Did you have a productive day? Almost the last class.
I had a productive day, the second to the last virology class, and I've made up the final exam. 70 questions. I took the exam myself, and I got 10 of them wrong.
How is that possible? How did you not know the answers?
Well, I do, but I made up the questions, but I didn't spend enough time because I wanted to get through it quickly. It's very funny. And then I went back and I said, oh, yeah, of course. So the thing is, some of the students do get 100% on their exams.
Well, you're not one of them.
I'm not one of them. Anyway, so that's dropping tomorrow. Tomorrow's the last class, therapeutic viruses. And then next week, perhaps I can start going to the Incubator. And to give everyone a little update, Amy and I last weekend ordered some furniture. They won't be here for, 6 weeks, right, Amy?
Yes. That stuff won't be here for 6 weeks. Yes.
But this week I ordered a standing desk, one that goes up and down, from a company called Fully.com. And I have to say, I ordered that one because that's what Marcus Brownlee has. And it's here. Actually, they tried to deliver it this week, but I gave them the wrong address. I have to give them the freight elevator address. I forgot to do that. So next week I can have a desk. The internet is in.
No, you need to bring the switches.
I have to bring the switch and install it. The router's not in yet. But we'll have internet, and we'll start working. And I could put a camera and do some things with just a blank wall behind me. So start small and build up. That's the way.
When are our chairs arriving?
He said 6 weeks, right?
No, the Aeron chair, the desk chair.
When I ordered it last year, of course, it was at the peak of the pandemic. It took 3 months to come in.
Did we not pay attention the other day when we pushed send and purchase?
Usually they give you an email update, but there's no update. So,
not so good.
So one of our listeners here, tell us a little bit about enteroviruses. A small
what about
uptick in
entros?
Anything you'd like. Say a few minutes on enteroviruses, Amy.
Neuro is not an entero, but there has been an uptick in neuro and rotas. And neuro is a calcivirus and rota is a Rio. And they are different. So neuro is a positive-stranded RNA and rota is a double-stranded RNA. But it's not really that important. They just cause diarrhea by different mechanisms is really all you need to know. So entros, so far there's been one case of AFM this year so far.
In the U.S.?
Which happened right here in New York, in Westchester, I believe. It was 71. But we're getting ready to see what happens with 68, so we're going to see.
So later down in the chat, someone says, anything happened at the Mouse House this week? And
we at least did not kill any mice bleeding them this week. Oh, that's because we haven't done it yet. The mice are generating some antibodies. They're very busy.
So we go
they
twice.
Like to go swimming.
Amy and I go twice. We go on Tuesday to inoculate and then Friday to bleed. And they have put her mice into a new rack, which really saves space. It's a compact rack where each cage has its own airflow. It's beautiful. It's like a hotel.
Well, for the mice, yes. That must be why they flood their cages and think that they're at the beach. But we need more mice, so we're going to have to figure out how to get to the other side. We need more mice. We don't have enough mice yet.
So that's this week, and tomorrow is Thursday. Friday we will bleed again.
Yep.
And So it's my job to bleed, and it's my job to inoculate. And Amy changes. Well, she designs the experiment, and she changes the cages.
And then when we're ready to sack, I take the organs of my choice.
Thank you, H. Zoo, for your support. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
By the way, I have a story to tell. All the money that you guys have been super chatting, it's in an account at Google. It's a good amount of money, and I tried to get it transferred to my bank account today, and it didn't work. I kept putting the numbers in. They said, sorry, this didn't work. So I don't know what to do. I'll try it tomorrow, but...
There has to be a complaint box. So, yeah.
If SARS-CoV-2 enters the airways but get blocked before it can establish an infection, does this failed attempt still boost your immune defenses a little?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's probably a little. Well, it all depends, right? It all depends if it hangs out and gets phagocytosed by a macrophage, right? As debris. So it depends. But yes.
So someone later on is asking if I've heard of Discord. Yes, I actually have made a Discord, whatever you call it, for Microbe TV. I want to make it a community site. So one of these days I'll get around to setting it up. I want to do that where people can go and chat and ask questions 24/7. Yep. For sure.
So far this has fallen along the lines of your weekly Reddit, right?
Well, now that my class is over, I can go back to the weekly Reddit. Unfortunately, the Reddit was at 11 a.m. Eastern on Wednesdays, which is when I'm teaching. But with class over, I'll resume the Reddits next week. Frank is back. Thank you so much. I told Frank I should be paying you for doing your great moderating job.
It's good.
Is Vanity Nutrition here? I haven't seen Vanity.
Her.
You did?
Yeah.
Hello, Vanity Nutrition.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get some questions. So we have already 300 people. It's amazing. So Pete wants to know, how many hours is the replication cycle for SARS-CoV-2? Can it speed up by getting fitter?
So we really don't have any idea what it is in actuality. We know what it is in a Calu-3 or a Vero cell. And that's about 24 to 26 hours.
So you mean
can it speed up
people? Yeah.
Yeah. Can it speed up by getting fitter? That mutation would have to really change the kinetics of the polymerase.
Yeah, anything
and
speed it up.
It doesn't necessarily make it fitter. So we know from Sabin and stuff that when you isolate fast replicating polio, and now somebody did it for Coxsackie B3, those viruses are actually attenuated. That's the basis of the Sabin strains.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that by speeding up, it's getting fitter. If you go by those examples.
In actuality, nobody has taken some of these variants and done one-step growth curves in cells and culture and seen if the yield is higher in infectious viruses, if the kinetics of reproduction is altered. Nobody has done that. It's all based on PCR from people.
Not 100% sure that I would say that. I would say it's not been published.
Yeah, who's done it?
But I would imagine that Vineet has done it. I got the impression that somebody from yesterday did it or is doing it and sees something slightly different. I think it's very hard to say that nobody has done it. Nobody has published basic research on these variants. But we don't really do basic science anymore. Not the type that you and I do. Actually, you can know this is actually a very controversial thing. So the WHO put a moratorium on boosters. So actually, no country in the world is allowed to give a booster until more of the world is vaccinated.
Yeah, they said, come on, give your vaccine to other people first. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because you don't really need a boost. You need to understand that you made a mistake when you interpreted some data. It's true.
I love
It's
it, though.
like
I love
saying,
the way you say it.
right.
Yeah.
But it's like, I mean, they gave you a bunch of vaccines, and then they said, okay, in 7 days or 12 days, we're going to see if you have antibodies and if you are more prone to disease or getting infected. And then we came out and said, oh, look, you have these high antibodies and you don't get an infection. And that's like when the guy gave Trump antibodies and came back 2 days later and said, oh, look, he has antibodies. Well, yeah, you just gave him a bolus of antibodies 2 days ago. So you really don't need a booster until you actually wait a whole year and you figure out whether or not the vaccinated people are getting disease. And it's also the misinterpretation of the fact that the vaccine was not designed to protect against infection. It's designed to prevent you from getting medium to severe disease and having to go to the hospital. So once again, try and understand. And then when you come back and you fully understand, then we can discuss.
So anyway, Paul wants to know if it's advisable. I don't see any harm except that it's not needed, as Amy says. And there have been some studies which suggest that, well, at least in people who have been infected and recovered, one vaccine dose is a really good booster, but the second doesn't really improve. I don't know if that's the same for vaccinated people, though.
I'm sure it's the same, but the other thing is with the WHO moratorium on it, it's a moot question. They're not going to be able to do it.
Does WHO have any authority over the world?
No, it's like the CDC. It gives you advice.
I see. So you don't have to listen.
Yeah, but considering the fact that you're a member of the WHO, what's the point of not listening then?
I'm just asking. I have no problem, but I just would like to know. Did you see the article saying it's inevitable the virus will mutate past the vaccines?
No, but I heard that Fauci and Rochelle said that, and I think that is not prudently thought out statement.
It's a ridiculous statement.
I said it was a prudently thought out.
Yeah, we have two different ways of saying it. And this electronic guy says, is it possible given it has to bind ACE2? Well, that's not the only effect of vaccines to interfere with ACE2 binding, right? There are other things that are done.
Right.
Like the T cells.
Yes. But there are other things, there are other epitopes and stuff. And I wouldn't be surprised if at someday someone actually did some basic science and said, oh, look, nucleic acid has a neutralizing epitope in it, and tried to figure out how that worked.
Has Delta mutated into chickenpox in the U.S.? Apparently it has here in the UK.
Actually, it's not the chicken. It's, I think it shouldn't be the chickenpox. I'm waiting for it to mutate into herpes or
measles. How about measles?
Measles. Sure. Smallpox. I'd actually like to see it come into smallpox. I'd like to see how it's gonna morph into smallpox.
Yeah, of course, the CDC has put out a figure saying its reproductive index is equal to that of chickenpox virus, varicella zoster virus.
Well, luckily you're having Jeff Shaman on Twib, and he can explain it all to us.
Well,
using big terms like Bayesian probabilities and whatever.
Yeah, we'll have, as many of you asked last week, we will have an epidemiologist on next week to explain how transmission is calculated. But I mean, he's going to take the increased transmission line, Amy. There's no doubt about it.
That's fine.
It's fine. I just want to know what they're thinking, because they're not thinking what we're thinking.
Well, it's all based on mathematical modeling. And so my argument would be...
Yep, it's a model.
Right, but my argument would be of why it's a flawed thing, and one should be very skeptical about mathematical modeling. So banks in 2008 all hired physicists to model the economy. And the end result was basically there's no possible way that everybody will default on their mortgage on the same day. And guess what happened? It's called the financial crisis of 2009 or 2008.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
Amy,
and all those physicists, bye-bye.
the world is running on models.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying.
Here's a problem, all of you listening. Amy and I are experimental virologists. We don't do models. We do experiments in cells and culture and animals. And so when people say it's this way because of a model, this makes us bristle. Is that a good word?
Sure.
Okay. So things are going swimmingly in Miami, huh?
I think that's sarcasm.
Yeah, I don't think you're swimming. I'm sorry to hear
Well,
that.
if you want to swim to the closest hospital, unfortunately, it might be full.
Yesterday, Amy sent me an op-ed from the Times by Alex Azar, right, who called himself the architect of Operation Warp Speed. And he said, hey, folks, get vaccinated. This is really not good.
Yes, and I believe that when I sent it, I titled it the text, How Ironic.
Indeed.
And I sent it to somebody else, and I said, the irony of the situation. And he said, yes, well said.
Okay, this Zithromycin is more than an antibiotic. It suppresses the cytokine response. Why doesn't early intervention help?
Because that's not what erythromycin does. And Daniel has discussed this over and over again, so listen to Daniel.
Well, it is also a suppressant to some extent, but obviously, I don't know why, but even steroids not given at the right time. Daniel always says steroids are not for everyone. It depends on the patient and their condition. So maybe it's the same with Zithromycin.
I don't know. I think Daniel's very adamant about using antibiotics in no matter what form they come in or what label is on the bottle.
Okay. I'm looking for some questions. Put your put A&V in front of your questions so I see it. Big spike in South Florida. All the hospitals are full. Yeah, it's too bad. I'm a little surprised. I thought this wouldn't happen because I thought more people would be vaccinated.
Seriously?
Yeah, well, I was naive, Amy, you know. Lollapalooza Festival played Chicago jammed together, massive numbers of people, 90% vaccinated, the rest tested negative. Is this a good idea? No, not a good idea.
Well, it's done. It was last weekend.
Yep.
And he's actually reporting the results of what they observed. That 90% of the people who attended the festival were vaccinated. Everybody remained negative. And if you were not vaccinated, you were masked. And they all remained negative too because they wore their masks. So while it may not be my favorite decision that people made, if you're going to make that decision, this is the best possible outcome. How's that?
Okay. Apparently in Australia, they are in lockdown. Okay. Sorry to hear that. Hello, there's Vanity Nutrition. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Oh, here we go. Daily cases in Australia around the 200, 250 mark. Maybe that's Sydney. It's not a lot, you know.
Well, it's one city, right?
Yeah. That's a big one, right?
I don't know. Is it as big as New York? I don't know anything about Australia.
Oh, and by Australian standards, it's a big city, right? Sydney, Melbourne.
Right, but if you extrapolate that to the whole country, are they at 200,000 cases a day, like Daniel suggests that we will be by the end of this month? Not a good plan.
Amy, do you know any studies about the vaccine being used on people with Asperger's?
I don't know. Most of the studies, I'm not sure why that would be segregated out. Is it's not an immune deficiency or cancer?
Yeah. Yes,
something that would suppress. So I don't know why that would be segregated out from the general population. I'm not clear.
I think Daniel has gone through a number of various conditions, and he says there's no immunosuppression in that condition, no need not to vaccinate. I mean, I'm not
Right.
going to offer an opinion, but I bet he would say it's okay.
Yeah, I think, they should talk to their physician.
I'm afraid to eat outside in a restaurant. Is this overkill? Outside?
Actually, I would think eating outside would be safest.
Yeah, it's safest. It's good outside. Yep. Oh, Zachary, thank you so much for your support. Media alarmism out of control. MSNBC brought on Osterholm, who said this pandemic would only end if everyone wore N95s. The cardiologist Topol and Wachter not helping out matters either. See, these are all the wrong people to be spokespersons, but that's what we have. This is
Well,
wrong.
but Topol is being pushed forward by Andy Slavitt.
Yep. And this pandemic would end when people get vaccinated. Osterholm is going on this idea that even if you're vaccinated, you can still transmit, which I don't agree with. And here's a question about that. Does the higher amount of virus from Delta cause more transmission? First of all, it's not been shown that there's a higher amount of virus. In one uncontrolled observational study in Provincetown, they find high PCR loads. And also the study out of China, the contact traced study, but there's not virus. It's nucleic acid, as Amy said earlier. So we have no idea if it's more virus. I don't see the data for more transmission. Making models, as Amy said, doesn't prove anything. So the answer
Well,
is
your model has the same. You flip a coin, you have a 50% of chance of it being on heads and a 50% chance of it being on tails. It's the simplest way to think of it.
Mark asks, how is the NIH? So, Mark, you must have listened to TWEVO. I didn't actually go there. It just was a Zoom call. It was fine. They just wanted to know how our space, that we have NIH support, so they wanted to make sure our space was being used appropriately.
Luckily,
it was funny.
Are you going to talk about the hawk?
Oh, you could tell them about the hawk.
No, you should tell them about the hawk. He decided he didn't want to pay overhead fees, so he flew the coop that day.
So the day of that meeting, Amy was on the microscope, and a hawk landed on the windowsill. Now we're on the 13th floor, right?
26 stories up.
And I was looking at Amy, and Amy took a bunch of pictures and sent it. And so we did a practice run, and I said to Amy, make sure the hawk is there. And she said, no, that'll cost extra. That'll cost extra. So the hawk was beautiful. I think Amy was a little creeped out, right? But I thought it was cool.
It's a little creepy. Everybody else thought it was cool, but I thought it was a little creepy. And then everybody said that the hawk flew away because they decided it was too much energy to try and eat me. I didn't have enough food on me for it.
I have the hawk here. Let me show it to you.
You're going to show the one where it's kind of fluffed up?
I just got one here. Let's see if it works. Here you go. There's Amy's microscope and the hawk. And just behind it is the GW Bridge.
Not as impressive as the bird.
Bird is very impressive, isn't it?
Yeah.
These often are circling around. They think they live in the bridge or nearby, and they look for rodents, and they land on the sills of our building frequently. We've seen them before. Anyway, the NIH was fine, but because of that, I missed TWEVO. Amy, listened to officials in Florida, and some never heard about monoclonal antibody infusions. I was in shock. How about you? Shocking?
We can say shocking. No, I'm not actually surprised. Daniel has lots of these stories about people outside of the tri-state area not knowing about monoclonals. I feel bad, and it's unfortunate that Florida is ignorant of therapies that could really help their population, especially since they've done away with most, if not all, of the appropriate smart behaviors like masking and social distancing and various other things. And he thought it was far more important to make sure that people sign up when they go to college and public education, their political decisions than advocate for, curtailing a pandemic. But what do I know?
Amy, why does smell and taste go away with COVID?
Crush the neuroepithelial and the olfactory epithelial crush the nerve terminals for a little bit.
So the virus
Doesn't support it properly.
reproduces in the surrounding cells in the olfactory epithelium, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then it somehow doesn't allow for proper signaling of the neurons. I don't think anybody really knows how it's always transmitted, but that's pretty much what happens.
What do you think about Gottlieb recently said, you really want to measure virus levels in low airways where aerosols are created? Yeah, I do. No, that's an excuse, saying, oh, it's too dangerous. I want to at least measure infectious virus in the nasopharynx, which nobody does. And sure, lower airways, why not? Gottlieb is being silly. What do you think?
What kind of doctor is he?
I don't know.
I know he's a doctor, but I don't know. So people give bowel samples all the time.
Well, this is the lower airways. These are the lower airways.
That's where bowel comes from.
Oh, bowel. Yeah, okay. Bowel. I thought you meant
it's called bronchial alveolar lavage.
Bowel. Yeah. Yeah, of course. They do. It's just being a jerk. Thank you for your contribution. Really appreciate it. Here's our fundraiser. He's excited that with furniture. Now I need to find the money. You bet.
All Jeff, right, well, get cracking because he's going to have to answer to me soon. Because I have less patience.
The 501c3 or whatever it is application. How do I find out the status? There's no way to contact. I would like to know.
Don't you have an account at the IRS?
Yes, I do.
We have an ERA account, and I go to it, and I click on the link to each grant, and I can see where the grant is.
I did check today, and there was no information.
So frustrating.
Is it true the CDC thinks Delta is more virulent? It does. They do think it is. All right. Let me show you. This is actually going to come out on TWIV at midnight today, but this is their leaked document which the Washington Post posted. I don't know if it's real or not. Who knows? But here's the slide where they say that, and let me get to it. Vaccine efficacy, effectiveness. It's all about communication. Delta variant. Here's the one where they say the variant is more transmissible, like chickenpox. They just slapped it onto a slide with no data. Okay. And then
they did Johnny Carson. What do you mean that they had no data? They held the virus up to its head, and they said, can you speak through my turban?
That's right.
That's what Johnny Carson did.
Delta infections, no, that's the higher load, which is the Provincetown study. And here, more severe disease than ancestral strains, published evidence from Scotland, Ontario, and Singapore.
Higher odds is not evidence.
Yeah, these are all statistical.
Odds is a probability.
That's right.
It's not evidence. It's a probability. And probabilities, when you go and you do sports betting, you are betting a probability. And you know what? The house always wins.
Also, Amy, the populations now are different from the way the ones getting infected now are different. As Daniel said, they're younger. And so that could play a role. And I don't know how you could. But you're right. It's a model. So they think that it's driving their messaging. But I am not.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it doesn't matter what we think.
Yeah, of
course. It's their messaging that is important. It's like marketing. And now that their marketing is screwing it up, it's always going to be screwed up. So you have to think about this in terms of how you're going to market the story and what you want the people to do. Like if you're the pizza company, how you're going to get the people who don't think that they need the pepperoni black olive pizza to call in 30 seconds after your commercial airs to order the pepperoni black olive pizza. No, I'm serious.
I know. CDC is a marketing operation. That's right.
Well,
not selling
everybody's a
anything.
marketing operation. When we write a grant, we're marketing our ideas. We have to figure out a way to tell the reviewers, you need this knowledge, even though you didn't know that you needed this knowledge 10 minutes ago. But you absolutely can no longer live without this knowledge. That's
The
how it
Great
works.
Karnak. The Great Karnak. That's the name. Steph just put it in. Amy's referencing the Great Karnak.
Great.
Put the envelope up to your head. It's what Amy says to me all the time when I say something. She says, "What are you putting the envelope up to your head and reading what it's?"
I do.
So Lori Garrett wants a third booster. Well, you know, Glory's good for some things, but not everything. What can I say? Amy, is there any evidence that the variants are escaping testing?
No.
And these are rather...
Testing is done by PCR. The alterations in the variants are not in nucleocapsid, and they're not in the common region, and they're not significantly different where you would not have the 6 nucleotides at the 3' end of the oligoneuronal. So they're not escaping testing.
Mark wants a slice and a beer now after you've just talked about pepperoni pizza. Why is everyone panicking about Delta if it's also said to be less dangerous? Andrea, because the CDC is saying things that aren't accurate, and the press picks it up, and then leaders like Osterholm and who's the other guy, Topol, they amplify it, and no one listens to TWIV except you 500 people here, and probably minus a few of you who just come to see what's happening. There's a lot of gloom about possible evolution against the vaccine due to limited protection against transmission. I don't think that's correct. I think there's very little evidence that transmission occurs after vaccination. Vaccines, in general, that prevent transmission. That's how the herd immunity effect comes about. I don't see any good studies that show that, so I wouldn't worry about it, Francois, until you have the data. Yeah, we think we have we don't have all the answers, folks. Someone just said we have all the answers. We don't. Well, we just tell you what we know. Thank you, Sandy, for your contribution. Really appreciate it.
We have all the answers? Why am I not better funded then?
Exactly. We're not here to give you all the answers, folks. We're
virologists.
Between Amy and I, we have 60 years of experience moving small volumes of liquid around.
Yeah, that always warms the cockles of my heart.
Amy, if you were to pick COVID-related research you think should have been done months ago or was done badly and needs to be redone, what would it be?
I only have to pick one topic?
You have many?
Yeah, for sure. I have many topics.
Well, just pick one.
I think that a lot of the basic science needs to be done about the virus. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about the virus and how it works and how it replicates and what certain things actually mean.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to talk just in relationship to the variants, there's a lot of suggestions that focusing on the spike alterations didn't really confer the phenotype that we're attributing it all the virus that we're giving to the virus. And so that tells you that we actually don't know enough about any of the other proteins. And so that's a failing. And we need to know much more about those proteins because there are lots of those proteins are probably far more important than spike, to be honest.
Yeah, they've been ignored.
Yeah. And I have a problem, and you and I have had large disagreements about the idea of whether or not you can really say, and like how important ACE2 binding is. There's lots of viruses out there that bind ACE2, but if they don't uncoat properly and, form replication complexes properly, who cares?
Someone asked, why am I picking on Gottlieb? because he does not want to sample the lower airways. That's the point. He says it's too dangerous. That's what should be done. He doesn't want to. That's why I picked on him.
Well, he obviously doesn't know that people give bowel samples all the time.
Mm-hmm. Can you look into your crystal ball and tell us what may come next after Delta?
Epsilon. I don't need a crystal ball. It goes alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon. End of discussion.
As long as the virus infects so many people, it will continue to vary, and the nature of that is unknown. But, if we would just immunize more people, it would really cut down on the circulation. And I wish we could do that. And here in the U.S., apparently we can't. In other countries, they're better at it. Amy, how do you inoculate a mouse with virus? Shoot a little syringe into their nose.
Well, not all viruses infect people intranasally, right? So there's different ways to inoculate mice. It depends on what you want to do, right? Like some viruses go in through the skin, so you want to do a subcutaneous infection. Some depends on what you do. We're immunizing mice not to develop a disease, but to stimulate an immune response. So you go IP to have it slowly diffuse out. It depends on what you want to do.
Yeah. Intranasal, you just drip a few drops into the nose. We used to do that for rhinovirus. You can put it in all sorts of ways. You can put it intravenously. Many different ways depending on the virus.
It depends on also what your question is.
Yeah. Can there be a greatest hits digest highlights of the most important information concerning the pandemic? Maybe a half hour to an hour long, like to forward it to non-TWIV viewers. Sure.
Well, that's your goal. Your goal is to do a 30-minute spiel once a week about the highlights of infectious diseases. So for the next 5 years, it's going to be all COVID.
You think?
Yes. No, I was being a little sarcastic. But for the next, I would imagine for the next year. We're 2 years into it already.
Can you explain the rookie mistake, as Daniel said? You picked up on that, didn't you? The CDC.
It wasn't just, but he wasn't just talking about the PCR testing.
What else was he talking about?
He was talking about basically that interpretation, right? And what vaccines are supposed to do.
Yeah, they're not supposed to prevent infection. They're supposed to prevent disease. And then that's part of it. And then the misinterpretation of the PCR results from the Provincetown observation. They said, there's a slide there in their deck that says, let me show it to you, because it's just really crazy.
But it's actually, I think what Daniel is actually really referring to is the whole thing, right? When you add all these pieces together, the rookie mistake is that you've negated the idea of vaccination.
That's right. So this slide.
So, right. And a rookie makes a mistake because they don't think the play through, and they make hasty, on a baseball field, you make a hasty pivot and the ball falls out of your glove and you can't turn the double play. And so here, your thing is you want more and more people to get vaccinated, and you didn't take the time to secure the ball and transfer it from the glove to the throwing hand. And so you came out and you hastily said something. You couldn't turn the double play. So you're not convincing anybody to get vaccinated. What you've done is you've negated the importance of the vaccine.
Exactly. So here, Barnstable County, that's Provincetown. No difference in mean CT values in vaccinated and unvaccinated. And this is bogus, because in a separate paper that Daniel reviewed from any New England journal, they showed that these infections in vaccinated cases in another situation, they're antigen negative. Over half of them are antigen negative. So they're not real infections. And that's when Daniel said rookie mistake, summarizing everything.
Which only goes to prove my point once again, don't test vaccinated people.
Yep. I agree with that. Shouldn't be testing vaccines. You said that over and over, actually, on these streams, Amy. You know that?
Yes, I know. And I said in May or April that the idea of taking away masks as the idea of an incentive to getting vaccinated was never going to work. People just are going to do whatever they want. It was like a free for all. And now you're seeing the consequences of these non-prudent decisions. It's unfortunate.
Does J&J give immunity to adenovirus as a bonus? What do you think,
I
Amy?
would hope not. I would hope not.
Probably a bit. It's non-replicating, so you're not going to get a lot. The mRNA is produced in large quantity, but you might get a bit.
Yeah,
I'm sure someone has looked at that.
Yeah, but I'm sure that they probably don't want that to happen because that's why people died when they used as gene therapy vectors.
Right.
So I don't know about that. And immunity is spelled wrong. There's no E.
It's hard in the chat. Sometimes you're excited and you make a mistake,
I know. Just saying.
Thank you, John Snyder, 2006. We really appreciate your support.
Is this like the Hungry Hungry Hippo game where the hippo's character pops out of water?
I don't know, but if you look on the YouTube chat instead of this program, you can actually see the stickers that they're talking about it's a super sticker. Kang asks, can viral shedding occur without pathological indicators?
What's a pathological indicator?
Well, any damage to the cells. Well, it can happen without symptoms. You won't know that you're shedding for some viruses, even SARS-CoV-2. It can reproduce in you. You can shed, but you won't have symptoms.
Of course there's typhoid Mary.
Of viruses. So by that you mean goes on for years? It depends on the virus,
Immunocompromised polio.
Yeah, 10, 15, 20 years they shed polio vaccine.
28. Adam had a paper on the 28.
Yeah. What do you think of the recombination, the Delta Plus with the spike K417N, which is also found in the beta, in terms of vaccine escape and an R0 of 5 to 8? So it's not going to escape the vaccine because, in fact, the T cells will protect you. Remember, don't forget, the T cell epitopes are not changing. These are B cell epitopes recognized by antibodies. So no vaccine escape. I just don't believe this recalculation. As Ron Fouché said a few weeks ago on Twitter, you cannot recalculate the R0, especially in an immune population. That's just not right. But you can't recalculate it based on looking at the spread of the virus in an outbreak. You have to do other studies. But that's what's being done. So I personally don't buy that 5 to 8. And I know every public health official in the country is repeating this, but there are plenty of us virologists who are not, including the two of us here. Two more questions?
Yeah, I have to go make my plates for plaque assay.
Okay, let's see. Okay, here. Please discuss the Scottish, Canadian, and Israeli studies comparing Pfizer against Alpha Delta. So here it is, right here. Let me show you. I got the figure right at my fingertips. Pfizer 2-dose VE for Alpha and Delta. So Alpha is dark circles, Delta is red triangle. England, Scotland. Confirmed infection, symptomatic disease, hospitalization. Pretty close except for confirmed infection. Canada, they're both symptomatic and hospitalization close. Only in Israel you have this spread. They don't do well Pfizer doesn't do well against Delta confirmed or symptomatic, but it does protect against hospitalization or death. I don't know why there's a discord there. Do you know, Amy? Do you understand that?
No, I don't really get it. Unless it's different populations.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they took all old people in Israel and England and Scotland are more, spread out throughout the population. Or maybe it's a bigger study in England and Scotland so that if you have one that is an outlier, it doesn't screw up the whole curve. I don't really know. I didn't read the paper.
But the point is that there are differences. So you can't generalize from Israel, which is what some people try to do, right?
I'm not even sure that Israel's data is correct. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not really clear. As I said, I didn't read the paper.
Amy, do serum neutralizing antibodies correlate with nasal neutralizing antibodies?
IgA? Why would IgG correlate with IgA?
No,
I don't
IgA in
think.
the serum and the mucosa.
Uh, no, it's far higher in the mucosal surface. IgA. I just had this conversation with Ian yesterday, where he wanted to make an intranasal vaccine because you really need the IgA at the mucosal surface. Um, but yeah,
But you have IgA in the serum. There's serum IgA, which is monomeric, and then there's
the
mucosa, which is
dimeric,
dimeric, right?
right, and the dimeric is much more potent as a neutralizing agent. Yeah,
Yeah, and but its FC receptors are blocked. Its FC portion is blocked, so it can't do the FC interaction. Only the serum IgA
yeah.
can
Well,
do
it
that.
might not need to do it.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it might have a completely different mechanism of neutralization. I don't think
All
anybody really knows. I mean, you know,
right, one more.
one
There's a
more.
study that showed only 50% of vaccinated individuals had CD8s a few months after vaccination. Are you aware of this, Amy?
I'm aware that I'm not, it might not be this study, but I'm aware that people have CD8s. They slightly go down after a few months, which is what you want. You don't want them at high titer all the time. So I'm not really all that concerned. What do you think?
No, I'm not concerned at all. I think you have memory CD8s, and that's what you need. So
Right.
this doesn't bother me, and I don't think all the studies have found the same. There are a lot of different ones are coming out, and they're not all the same conclusions. So
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that people have misunderstood the immune system and how it works. And I think it wasn't helped along by a certain other individual who is an immunologist and very co host. In the idea that, you needed to have these high titers, and, when they started to decay, you should scream that the sky is falling. I think that's the way the immune system works. And when you absolutely have nothing, call me. Then we'll be concerned. But since there's no standardized test for any of this, I don't know if you will ever find what low levels actually really are, or
yes,
what they mean.
well, that's the other problem, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Amy.
My pleasure. I have to go plate some cells, make some plates for tomorrow.
All right, see you tomorrow.
All right.
Good
Bye.
night. All right. Can you talk about how you would design a study to determine actual virus load in SARS-CoV-2 positive vaccinated versus unvaccinated people? Twivers, no, PCR-CT isn't correct. Exactly. It's not a trivial study, and that is why it's not been done. PCR, you take a nasal swab, throw it in a tube, do the PCR, right? Here's what you'd have to do. First of all, you need to measure infectious virus, right? Which means you have to go into a BSL-3 lab because that's the containment needed. You have to wear a suit. Not every institution has a BSL-3 lab. But more than that, in the BSL-3 lab, then you would do a quantification of infectivity, maybe by a plaque assay, right? You can plaque this virus. The problem is, how do you compare one person to another? Because a nasal pharyngeal swab or an anterior nares swab, whatever you want to do, is not quantitative, right? How do you know you're getting the same material from Amy as you're getting from me? You don't. So you have to have some kind of calibration built in. You could count the cells, or you could take a portion of the sample, extract it, and see how much of a cellular marker, a gene or an RNA is present, for example. So then you could say there's more. We'd have to normalize the infectivity that we get. So then you'd have to get people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated, and enroll them in a study where every week perhaps they would do a nasopharyngeal swab and send it in for virus determination. And it would have to be adequately powered. Offhand, not 50 people. You need a few hundred people to make it statistically significant. And you want to know what vaccine they've had, right? There are a number of different options out there. So you have to decide. If you want to do it in the U.S., you'd probably use an mRNA vaccine because that's most of what has been out there. So you see, it's an involved study. And frankly, unless vaccinated people start getting sick, there is no reason to do it because vaccines do not prevent infection except for the HPV vaccine. They prevent disease and death. So why are we checking for reinfection? We're forgetting our history. Only if vaccinated people start to get more severe disease. There's a little bit of hospitalization now. Yeah, because many, many more people are being vaccinated. So we're going to see more people hospitalized. But when that really gets worse than it is now, then we have to think about perhaps a booster or a different vaccine to match whatever is circulating. So that's how I would do it. But it will never be done. I guarantee it. Never be done. So speaking of BSL-3, is it even vaguely reasonable for it to be a BSL-3 pathogen? Well, if it were BSL-2, boy, we could start doing experiments. And we would. Now, Amy is actually qualified for the BSL-3. Ian Lipkin has a BSL-3 on campus, and he allowed her to train. And so she could actually do experiments. But it's actually quite a chore. You have to sign up. You have to plan exactly what you're doing. You can't go in by yourself. You have to have a buddy. It's booked. If BSL-2, man, we could just do it in our lab. So what would make it BSL-2? Well, we have a vaccine, so that's the first step. And we have to get most of the population immunized. Then you could do it at a BSL-2. I'm suspecting that at one point that'll happen. In fact, somebody asked me, what should happen in the future? And I think one of the things is to make it a BSL-2 so we can do a lot of the experiments that we can't do right now. Thank you, Faster Tortoise, for your contribution. I really appreciate it. It'll go to the incubator as soon as I can figure out how to get the money out of Google. I know there's a way to get around it, but you have to understand that I have priorities about where I want to put my efforts. A good part of my day is spent doing this, communication, so I'm not always happy to go hunt down things like that. Anyway, so Barry says, can you measure virions? You can measure infectious particles. That would be the easiest way to do it. You mentioned an antiviral that would have prevented the pandemic. So here's the story. In 2003, SARS-1 came and went after 8,000 cases. We figured out it came from a bat that infected a civet in the countryside. The civet was brought into the meat market, not just one, but many, and they infected people. So we went, not we, but the royal we went to the countryside. We sampled bats in caves, and we found SARS-like coronaviruses, and we found that they could infect human cells. And at the same time, people were sampling workers in the countryside, farmers, and they found 2 or 3% of them had antibodies in their serum to these SARS-like coronaviruses, but they were never sick. So these viruses can infect people. So we could have made an antiviral. We could have taken pick a target, protease, RNA polymerase. Take the gene, put it in cells, produce the protein, and search for drugs. This is straightforward. It can be done in 5 years, but nobody wanted to support it. Industry didn't want to, NIH didn't want to. So the result is we're stuck here. We didn't have anything at the beginning, but there's one drug now that is in phase 3, molnupiravir, which is a nucleoside analyte. It's a chain terminator of RNA synthesis, inhibits the polymerase. That drug was around before the pandemic, but it never was developed. It could have been brought through phase 1, safety in people. Nobody ever did it. So we have ourselves to blame for this. That's the story. Do children have any unique clinical features with Delta? Not that I'm aware of. Of course, they do have unique clinical features, including MIS in general. They have less severe disease than older people. It's certainly an age dependence, but it is not zero, as Daniel says, and MISC is unusual. But I'm not aware that it's any different with Delta, nor long COVID is any different. But I'm sure we'll find out. Which parts of the coronavirus are prone to mutate? So the genome is large, right? It's 30,000 bases long. It encodes many, many proteins besides spike, although you wouldn't know it because people only talk about spike. And so the whole genome is prone to mutation. And all of these proteins that you list, the spike, the E protein, which is another membrane protein. The M is beneath the membrane, provides some rigidity to the membrane. The N is a protein that coats the RNA. All of these can change. And in the variants, there are changes in these other proteins. Nobody pays any attention to them. And they could very well be responsible for some of the properties of the variants, the fitness advantage, for example. But everyone's focused on spike. This is what a pandemic does, as Amy always says. You bypass good science. I mean, we get vaccines, and that's great. But there are a lot of other questions out there. Okay. Let's see here. We got some questions. Yes, WHO has no authority. Some countries will listen and some will not. When errors occur in virus genome replication, is there any tendency for the same error to occur repeatedly? There may be hotspots of mutation in certain genomes which are more able to accommodate, but the mutation frequency should be random. It isn't entirely, but in any one infected cell, let's say you have 10,000 genomes produced, and if the reproduction frequency if the error frequency is 1 in 10,000, then every 10,000 bases will be substituted. So if you had a 10,000 base genome, the whole genome, every possible change could occur. So it's massive. It's really massive. Is it correct to say variants are no less contagious or just as contagious as the original virus? I think they are more fit, which means they are better at reproducing in the population. And why they are more fit, we don't know. It could be a transmission issue. It could be, but no one, in my view, models don't prove that. You have to do experiments. Could be, as someone has mentioned, faster replication. It could be evasion of immunity. I think immunity has a lot to do with it, because as a population gets immune, then a virus that can escape immunity will be more fit. And we've seen a series of variants, alpha, beta, delta, gamma, each displacing each other as one becomes more fit. And I think it's an antigenic escape, but it's other properties as well. Everybody wishes Amy could be their friend. I talk to Amy all day, not all day, a lot. It's very, very much fun because she's very smart. If the vaccine doesn't provide sterilizing immunity, what stops the virus from mutating with selection pressure? Well, there's nothing, and that's what happens with influenza virus, right? We have an immune population. It selects for variants because there's a low level of replication in a vaccinated person. And I think it's low enough to not transmit, but it's low enough so that you can get changes in selection of those. Exactly. Vaccinated people everywhere are being hospitalized. As you vaccinate more people, you're going to have more people hospitalized. It's not 100%, but they're not dying. There will be deaths, though. It's not 100%. Then there's a good number on this CDC document. Here, let's take a look at this. This is, let me move it over here. Greater risk of disease, hospitalization, and death among unvaccinated versus vaccinated. These are national estimates. This is disease, hospitalization, and death. Fully vaccinated, the blue; unvaccinated, the green. So you see the fold reductions. At the current incidence, there are 35,000 symptomatic infections every week among 162 million vaccinated Americans. That's a very low percentage. The vaccine is working. So these are the data you need to look at. And there will be hospitalizations, of course. Absolutely. I've noticed that Fauci doesn't follow the research very well. Well, here's what Fauci does, I think. I don't think he reads many papers on his own, but he has a staff of people who read papers, and then they give him a summary. So he can be influenced by what they're doing. He understands what's going on, but he certainly has a different perspective than I do, and that's fine. As I've said all the time, I'm data-driven. I want to see the data that proves whatever it is that you're saying. We're just getting to smallpox, huh? I have a trip to Spain in late August. Their curve is coming down. Safe to go. Who knows what's going to happen in late August? You might have another spike, right? So I think it's safe. It's just a matter of whether they lock down and you can't leave, right? That's what I'd be worried about. But if you were vaccinated and you mask up in the plane, I think you're fine. When you say the vaccine wasn't designed to be sterilizing, and by the way, the sterilizing is the word we use, but it's not a good word, right? Because in some people's minds it means you're sterile, you can't reproduce. It's not the case. Sometimes that's the way we use the wrong words, but they're stuck with us. Anyway, it's hard to make a sterilizing vaccine. The HPV wasn't designed. It was just made. The HPV is an empty capsid with no nucleic acid in it, and it just does a great job at inducing mucosal antibodies, and much better than natural infection. So it prevents infection. And so it wasn't designed to be that way, but it just turned out. I'm not sure you could design it to be sterilizing. Sterilizing means you have, for a mucosal pathogen, you'd have relatively high levels of antibody in the mucosa, so that any incoming virus is immediately bound up and neutralized. And that's hard to do because mucosal antibodies decline rather rapidly after infection. So in most cases, you get infected, and then you have a memory response rather quickly in a few days. And that tamps down reproduction, and I think you don't shed essentially, and you don't transmit. Okay, Jennifer asks a good question. Well, I get that vaccines were designed to prevent serious disease and death. Don't you think Israel's early experience with reduced case rates made us think the vaccinated wouldn't get sick? Well, that was an incorrect impression made by doing the study too close after the second dose when antibody levels are very high. And so we got an impression that it would prevent infection. And then as we moved out, the protection went down and some people got sick. But if you look back at the clinical trials, you got let's say for the Moderna, 90 some odd % protection against all COVID. But there was still some disease there. And if you break it down, there was more mild disease than severe. Mathematical modeling without considering human behavior makes no sense. The R value will be higher in Florida than Vermont. Doesn't mean it's a different version. Yes, this has always been my point, that the human factor is never considered in these calculations. And yet, reproductive index, the secondary infection rate, they're all influenced by human density, right? Here's another factoid about the Delta. PHE England, Public Health England. That's redundant, right? PHE England, right? A couple of weeks ago, released a report showing that the secondary infection rate for Delta had gone down to close to the Alpha variant. Wait a minute. I thought you said it was more transmissible. Oh, I guess it depends on how people are interacting. That's not intrinsic transmissibility of the virus. That's what I'm talking about. I think we have a communication problem between the epidemiologists and the virologists. When I say transmission, I mean the intrinsic property of the virus to transmit from one person to another. Obviously, the spread can be influenced by density, and that's what we're seeing for the most part. Now, it could be that there's an intrinsic virus difference, but you'd have to show it. You'd have to do experiments in the lab to show it. And that's my point. Nobody's done that yet in a convincing fashion. I'm not sure we're the best. We just are virologists, and it happens that virologists are desired right now. But once the pandemic is over, it'll be like pre-COVID. Nobody heard of this this week in virology, which is okay. But we're going to do other things to stay current, to stay in the public's eye. But Brett Weinstein, I was asked to debate him a number of weeks ago about the origin of SARS-CoV-2. And all right, this guy's an evolutionary biologist. He doesn't know anything about viruses. I don't want to debate someone who doesn't know about viruses and makes inaccurate comments. So that's why I don't want to debate him or have him on. I bring him on Twitter, it kind of, what is the word? It dignifies him, or it's not dignified, but it's another word that I can't think of. Yes, models can be derived from experimental data. And the way that's done here is they observe the rate of infections in a population, and they use Bayesian models to approximate transmission. But that's not telling you about the intrinsic transmissibility of the virus, because it is too influenced by human behavior. That's my point. And the EPIs will say, I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I don't, but in terms of viruses, I know that they can have intrinsic greater or lesser transmissibility. Yeah, Azar is a Republican. He actually said in the op-ed, he said, my party of the Republicans need to get behind this vaccine. I don't know why it's a political issue. They're making it a political issue. It shouldn't be. It's public health. It's people living or dying. How can you use that to get your party elected? Not really nice. What's up with ADE, antibody-dependent enhancement? I don't see any evidence of it. What that is if you let's get infected with, let's use dengue virus where there are 4 serotypes. You get infected with dengue virus. Yeah, you have a mild disease. You may recover. You make antibodies against it. And then you're fine. And then you get infected a number of years later. And then you get infected with a different serotype. And those antibodies, the antibodies you induce from your memory response are against the original one. They will bind the virus, but they will not neutralize it. And here's a picture I'm going to show you. So your primary infection with dengue, then you have a secondary infection. The antibodies from the primary infection are made by a memory response. They bind the new dengue you get, but they don't block its infection. And now those antibodies can attach to, say, a macrophage and get the virus in it where it normally wouldn't, and you get more severe disease as a consequence. So that's ADE. Does it happen for SARS-CoV-2? No. I see no evidence. Of course, people are always going to say it does, but there's no evidence that it's doing that at all. How has almost every public health official in the U.S. been spreading information that it's more transmissible and could be deadlier? I don't know. You'd have to ask them. They say, oh, that's what the data says. And then you should ask them, where are the data? Have you read it? Have you critically looked at it? And I bet they haven't. Because I see it and I'm not convinced at all. Any news on under 12? Not for a while. Probably not till the end of the year, I'm sorry to say. Lambda is the next variant that is beginning to circulate in a number of places. There is actually, here I have another slide. If you guys like a little pause from me gabbing, here's another slide I can show you. Oh, that's perfect. Right, came up right first one. This is from The World in Data. This is sequences by variant. These are analyzed sequences in the last 2 weeks that correspond to each variant in different countries here. So it's a snapshot of what's being diagnosed. It is by no means a comprehensive analysis of what's there, but in the last 2 weeks, it tells you what's dominating. And you can see in many countries Lambda, which is Delta, which is this cyanish color, is 100% Russia, UK, Bangladesh, Spain, etc. US a little bit less. You see, then there's some other variants in other countries that are competing with it. Here. And you asked about Lambda, this purpley one. And I know it's one place it's standing out here is Mexico. Most of the other places we're not seeing it. And look at in Brazil, we have the Gamma. So here's my view. These are variants that are more or less fit. When two are in the same population, one wins and outcompetes. And sometimes it doesn't. If these viruses were inherently more transmissible, wherever they went, they would outcompete, but they don't. They don't always outcompete. Now, Delta is unusual because in a lot of places it has outcompeted, but not everywhere. I think it's the most fit of all of them so far. Is Lambda better? I don't think so, but we'll see. Plausible deniability. CDC lifted restrictions too soon. This could be more transmissible claim as the excuse to reinstate them. I thought about that, but I would hope that they would be above that, right? I agree it was a mistake to say demask in May because they assumed that the people who were not vaccinated would continue to mask, and they were wrong because the moment they said that, everyone took their masks off, and that's why we're having the outbreaks we're having, the post-July 4th demasking get-together outbreaks. It'll go down by the end of the summer. Then in the fall, when we go back to school, it'll go back up again, for sure. Do you think a gold standard broad-based therapy will be developed? You mean an antiviral or some other therapeutic? There will be antivirals that'll be orally available, like Tamiflu, so that's better. And maybe molnupiravir will be the first of those. But as you see, it takes a long time to make antivirals. Well, you put $25 billion into something and it happens. It can happen quickly. And that's what happened with vaccines. Okay, how can China be reporting so few cases with a less effective vaccine? And I don't think as many people are vaccinated. I think their non-pharmaceutical interventions are really severe. And that has really stopped the transmission. It's there because they have cases now and then. But I think NPIs have been really effective, still masking and so forth, I understand. I love TWIV 786 mucus. Why can't we get the cell-specific paper sooner? I don't know what you mean. Why can't we get it sooner? Not sure. Sorry. So Tom said Asperger vaccination's okay. My nephew's fine. Of course, Tom, an N of 1 is not evidence, but I think you're probably right. Thank you, Rob, for your support. Really appreciate it. And a few more people with Asperger's are saying it's okay. All right. My niece tested positive. Her mother's having symptoms. Her TCR was negative. Could she have COVID? Will test positive. Retested? Sure. The test might not have worked. You should get retested, but it could also be some other respiratory infection. Remember, there are other things going around. The method section for the Provincetown study. Well, it was in the morbidity and mortality weekly report. That's the best you're going to do. And it's fairly detailed there. But remember, it's not a controlled study. And how well do PCR tests predict viral load? You really want to know the answer to that? Well, I got another slide for you. Let me see if I can find it really quickly, because this is one of my favorites. Does PCR predict viral load for any virus, right? But especially for SARS-CoV-2. I wish I had someone that would get these up for me. Let's see, what lecture would that have been in? That would have been very early on in the course, so I can find that. Just stay with me here. Let's see. Lecture 3, Genomes and Genetics. There we go. You guys really should take my virology course. You know, it's free. I know you have to listen to me, and probably you don't like that. But it's really good, and it's got all this stuff, and it's updated. And in the fall, I'm actually going to do a live stream version of it. Did you know that? And it's going to be twice a week. I'll probably do it in the morning so people overseas can get it. Stay tuned. Okay, here it is. SARS-CoV-2 RNA and infectivity. So here's days after onset of infection, and the PCR measurement is in green. And you can see you've got a peak at about day 6 or 7, and then the infectivity declines within 9-10 days. There's no more infectious virus, but PCR positivity continues. So it really depends. We can, in this area, the blue area, we can make a correlation between the amount of PCR material and infectivity, but not beyond it. So, and this is for one variant. So what happens when another variant comes in? Here's the thing with a variant. It could be, when you do PCR, you take a nasal swab, right? And you get cells. You get all the viral RNA, not just the particles. So you're not just measuring infectious virus, you're getting mRNAs from the cells. And a variant could make more mRNA than its ancestral virus. Sure, why not? So you need to measure infectious virus. You can't do PCR except for diagnosis. That's fine. But if you want to make conclusions about what viruses are doing, PCR is not the way to go. So how do they predict viral load? Up to a point. Oh, look at this. This is a good one. On average, do viruses tend to evolve to be more transmissible and less virulent? Sugar. You might have taken my course because that's exactly what I talked about this week. In theory, yes, they should evolve to be more transmissible and less virulent. Let's say a virus spills over from an animal into humans and it's extremely virulent. That should decline over time to preserve transmission so that the hosts live longer and so forth. We don't have any data for that except the experiment in Australia where, rabbits were introduced many years ago for hunting. They reproduced highly. They overran the country. And so they decided to release a virus and kill the rabbits. So they released a myxoma virus. The first year, it killed 99.9% of the rabbits. But that 0.1%, those rabbits were resistant. They multiplied, and then the virus changed to be less virulent, so it would keep the rabbits alive because the virus is transmitted by mosquitoes. So you keep them alive longer, you get more transmission. So yes, in theory, less virulent, more transmissible. But it's hard to see that. This is the first outbreak where we could have studied that. But we're blowing it because we're not doing the right experiments. We could actually look at virulence. We could actually look at transmission in a careful way, but we're not. We're using modeling, and it's not good enough, in my opinion. Now, we have a whole lot of viruses in us. Poliovirus, measles, chickenpox, herpes virus. They're not horribly virulent in most people, unless you're immunosuppressed. But what were they like when they first came into humans from an animal? Maybe they were more virulent, and over time they got less virulent. There's some evidence that HIV, which has been in people since 1920, is becoming less virulent. So I think that's the trend that we observe. They become less virulent. Transmission is a powerful selective force, the intrinsic transmissibility of a virus. However, it can also change by virtue of other properties being changed accidentally, and so can virulence. So I think this virus, SARS-CoV-2, came out of the bat and went into people. A few transmissions early on, it became transmissible enough, obviously, to spread throughout the world. So the becoming more transmissible doesn't make a lot of sense to me either, as well as not having good data for it. Okay, what else? That's good. We need to worry about any of the emerging viruses in the melting Arctic ice. I don't think so. I think it's a pretty long shot that something is going to come out of there. Now, we know there are infectious viruses there because, not the Arctic in particular, but Siberian ice cores, right? People go into Siberia, they take really deep ice cores and they can tell how old they are, right? So a number of years ago, a French group took a 35,000-year-old ice core from Siberia and they isolated a giant virus from it. And from that came this idea that the ice is full of viruses and as it melts, they're going to come out and infect us. So I think it's unlikely because many of these places, there weren't many people to begin with who might have died and been frozen with their viruses, and there probably weren't many animals either. So I think it's really unlikely that that's going to happen. So I don't worry about it. It's a low probability issue. I worry about other things. Yes, I think, Jenny, you're right. Vaccinated people think that vaccines are supposed to prevent infection. And I tell this to people and they're like, really? I didn't know that. And it kind of makes me sad because it's the way vaccines work. And people don't know. But that's a problem with scientific knowledge in the world, right? So Nick and Mike, so here's the thing. People know this, that there's not always a correlation with infectious virus, but they don't know when to apply it, right? And that's the problem. You have to be able to look at the nuanced situation and say, oh, here's a situation where I can't use PCR to say transmission is occurring. Vietnam was the envy with their mitigation. Now rates and deaths have changed. Yeah, I mean, Hawaii also had it handled, and now they're back up. Why? Because you never get rid of the virus. And if you go back to life and you're not vaccinated, you're going to have outbreaks. That's it. Seasonality with air-conditioned, humid, subtropical states. I think what we're seeing are just rounds of outbreaks, and they may be mitigated by some of these environmental conditions, but you have an outbreak, you immunize a good fraction of the population. It's self-limiting, but then you still have a lot of people left. Virus gets into them, you have another outbreak. That's what we're seeing here. It's nothing fancy. Okay. My nephew and niece got COVID from their dad, who contracted it from unvaccinated people who wouldn't wear masks. So what do you mean by they got COVID? They tested positive, but they were well. They weren't very sick. Well, it can happen. How can you have more RNA detected by PCR but not more virus? I think I just told you that, so I don't need to go into that again. I just showed you the figure, and I just said that not all the RNA it's extracted from cells is viral, is virus particle RNA. It can be mRNA, and depending where you are in the infectious cycle, it can be different. Depending on the variant, it could be different as well. Do I know of any virologist who's actually studying variant spread to get an accurate R naught? I talked about the experiment earlier, so I don't need to tell you that again. But you really don't do R naught after the beginning. In the beginning of an outbreak, when there are no mitigations, no population immunity, that's when you get R naught, which is supposed to be the fundamental reproductive index for the virus. But remember, it's made up of population and virus properties. It's not virus specific. And it can change. You can change the R naught by mitigations. You can reduce it to less than 1, and that stops an outbreak. So it's not an absolute measure of transmissibility. It's heavily influenced by population and interactions. And I don't know anyone who is studying the virus, complementing the kinds of studies I talked about before. You would have to do studies in the lab. A simple experiment. Take some respiratory epithelial cells from people, which you can get, infect them with the ancestral SARS-CoV-2, infect them with a variant, and just see if the variant makes more infectious virus. Are the kinetics different in some way? You know, we do what we call growth curves, where we infect cells and we take samples of virus at different time after infection. We can compare those. It's a way of comparing the fitness of different viruses. Nobody's done that. If they have, they haven't published it yet. I'm hoping that they will, and that we'll get some answers for sure. But I don't know. I don't know if anyone is doing it. How well do vaccinated people spread? Overall, I don't think they spread very well. That's the whole point of a vaccine, that you reduce transmission. Otherwise, you wouldn't protect an entire population and having less than 100% of people vaccinated, right? I am not convinced that it's spreading extensively. I'm not convinced that vaccinated people will spread infection. Why wouldn't everyone wear a mask and end the pandemic? Because that doesn't get rid of the majority of the virus circulating. You need to have 80% of the population vaccinated, and then you will see a great reduction. And right now, as you know, the U.S. is barely at 50%. If vaccines can transmit Delta of a certain threshold, but vaccinees, but I don't believe that credulopathic. I don't think the data are there. That's one slide from CDC. It's not enough to conclude that, and the caveats I've mentioned. No, vaccine passports do not provide a full sense of security. You can get infected. You're likely not going to transmit. I don't see any evidence yet for transmission by most vaccinated individuals. Now we're at the Hawks. My gosh. Hello, Renzo. How are you tonight? Can you explain how you envision the virus becoming a common cold virus? Time frame. So the very first TWIV we did with Ralph Barrick, gosh, early last year, he said, we have 4 common cold coronaviruses, and they all spilled over from some animal reservoir from non-human animals, 2 of them from bats, I believe, and 2 of them from rodents. And that happened hundreds of years ago. So we don't know if that was virulent back then. But today they're quite mild infections. And part of the reason is that everyone's infected and has pretty good immunity. So that may be the key. So once we have very widespread population immunity, whether we get there by vaccination or infection, a combination of the two, having the population immune will reduce the severity. So you can see people who are vaccinated get much less severe disease. And I think as the immune systems mature, that, and perhaps the virus changes as well, that's the scenario, that population immunity will really drive becoming a common cold virus. What is the time frame? So Ralph Barrick, he's the expert, not me. He had no idea, maybe 50 years, maybe more. It's going to be a while before we're there. I won't be around. If antibodies wane or fall, then boosters are needed. No. Antibodies are not the whole story. Did you see the paper? We're going to do this on TWIV next week. This paper, I actually blogged about it last week. So they found that in the Pfizer vaccine trial, protection after the first dose kicked in at about day 11, and there were no antibodies at that time. What was there? T cells. T cells helped prevent infection. Now, I know our good cardiologist is out there saying that T cells don't matter for COVID, but that's wrong. They do matter because the epitopes they recognize on infected cells don't change in any variant, and that's why the vaccines prevent severe disease and death for the most part. So the antibody waning doesn't matter. You don't want to keep high antibody levels. You want to have low antibodies, but you want to have memory B cells that are ready to make antibody on reinfection. So waning of antibodies is irrelevant. It's another example of how the press doesn't get the fact that after infection, after immunization, antibody levels, T cell levels do not remain high. They always go down. Not to zero. They go to a low level, which indicates you have memory cells that are there ready to be activated upon infection. So that is the way to look at it. Waning is not important. Is Lambda more contagious than Delta? It hasn't been claimed yet, but just wait. I'm sure it will be. get 2 rooms, fill one with infected, unvaccinated people and the other with infected, and sample the air and measure the level of viral virions. Well, the air is, you could do that. I don't think this is an ethical experiment, but you could do it in their homes. You could do swabs and measure infectious virus, as I said earlier up in the show. Yep. I get the impression that virologists are more chill compared to epidemiologists. I don't really know. No, not all virologists are chill. A lot of virologists are uptight. We have a different way of looking at things. We're experimentalists. The epidemiologists look at what happens in a population and try to make conclusions about what's happening. And they have to use models because they can't sample everyone, right? But we do experiments to try and get to the bottom. So we would take Delta versus Alpha and compare them in the lab in cells that are relevant to COVID and say, yeah, there is a difference, or no, there isn't. So, for example, early on, remember the D614 variant that emerged and spread everywhere last year? That was the first one. They said it was more transmissible. Well, it ended up going everywhere because it was probably more fit than the original virus for whatever reason. But in the lab, people did growth curves. It grows slightly better, but slightly better, that doesn't mean anything. And it transmits slightly better in hamsters. Not the right experiments. So we don't even know to this day whether D614G is actually more transmissible intrinsically, or it's just more fit. Could antibodies to epitopes on the spikes outside of the RBD still be neutralizing? Absolutely. So, antibodies to the spike, the RBD, block attachment. And so everyone thinks that's the only way you can neutralize. But now, Brian, you have brought up the scenario of antibodies somewhere else. Sure. The spike has to undergo conformational changes on binding in order to fuse. The antibodies could prevent that. They could prevent post-entry changes. These are all mechanisms known for other viruses. They could even not neutralize in cells in culture, and yet bind the spike and lead to its uptake, say, into monocytes via Fc receptors. So we just did a paper on TWIV showing that for a different virus. So absolutely. We are myopically focused on the RBD, and I think that's not right. Now we just got to the pizza. Yearly live attenuated intranasal boosters for the old and immunocompromised. Would they be a good idea? You know, an attenuated vaccine is a great idea because you get all the viral proteins made, and then you can get lots of T-cell epitopes. They're not so easy to make, and to make sure they're genetically stable. And, you know, we have one. So one of the polio vaccines, the Sabin polio vaccine, is great. It's an infectious attenuated vaccine, right? It provides great mucosal immunity. But FluMist is also an attenuated vaccine sprayed into your nose, and I mean, while I think it's the best of the flu vaccines, the protection still isn't very good. We need a shift in strategy there for those. So it's not working for every virus where it's used. So it would have to be tested, but I think it should be. I think it should be and could be sprayed into your nose and be really easy to administer. Jenny says the vaccines are doing what they're supposed to. They're not being implemented, which I presume you mean they're not being taken by enough people, right? Exactly. Next administration put TWIV team in charge. I don't think they'll ever do that. We're not administrators. You know, if you go back to Lori Garrett's episode on TWIV, she said the CDC used to be run by gumshoe detectives, right? People who went out and traced epidemics themselves, and now it's been replaced by administrators and policymakers. And she bemoaned that. She didn't like that, and I agree. I think, and we're not gumshoe detectives, but nobody cares about. They think we're just a bunch of podcasters who aren't serious about anything and blah, blah, blah. So they're never going to ask us. It's fine. I'm glad you like TWIV, Neil. We appreciate it. We're just telling you our opinions and based on our training. Will we see more cancers? It's hard to know, but I'm trying to think of what would be the mechanism, right? If you had an immunosuppressive virus like HIV or measles, then you might see more cancers. But this, as far as we know, this is not immunosuppressive. The production of cytokines for a long period of time is a problem because then cells divide and they could become cancerous as a consequence. But I don't think we have so much long-term cytokine production, at least not for years, that would be required for that. So I think not, but I could be wrong. I've heard of multiple families getting COVID. Well, yes, it's a good situation to spread it, right? But also, the more people vaccinated, the more they're infected. They get mild disease. Now, if you would like to have no disease and still get infected, well, that's hard to design for. And these vaccines just so happen they're producing a little bit of disease in the absence of severe disease. And I think you should be happy with them. It's better than not having a vaccine, right? Is there any benefit to administering monoclonals to patients who have previously been vaccinated or are now in the hospital? So someone asked this to Daniel Griffin, and he said yes, they should be treated. Even if they're vaccinated, if they've got COVID and they're hospitalized, they should get monoclonals. Yes. This Week in Pizza, TWIP. This Week in Parasitism. Yep, if you have all the answers, you don't need more funding, that's for sure. I'm just halfway through the questions, so I'll try and get through as many as I can. I'm here alone tonight. There's nobody in my house, so I can do as I wish. I could go on forever. Yeah, I've heard about this comparison to Tuskegee, but this is not even close. This has already been in millions of people. It's fully vetted. It's safe. So I understand the hesitations, but it's not the same. It's not a day one experimental vaccine. Why do I think the number of cases with Delta have gone down? Because the vaccines work. They're preventing diseases. They're not preventing infections. If we looked for that, we'd see people are still being infected. But it works against Delta. Plus, they do a lot of testing in the UK. Rich Condit was telling the story of his daughter who's over there doing a lighting show, and she has antigen tests every day. It's incredible what they do. Morris, thank you for your contribution. It's really appreciated. Pink Book seems to say that IPV, inactivated polio vaccine, infects you and you shed IPV virus at the same rate. Well, first, inactivated polio is not infectious, so you're not shedding anything. So, Sheldon, I'm not sure what you're saying. If you're talking about oral polio vaccine, you do shed OPV and it gets into the community and it circulates extensively, yes, but it only rarely causes disease in this case because it reverts. 1 in 1.5 million recipients, you get polio. Is asymptomatism a function of low viral load? I don't think so. I think some people can have high loads and be asymptomatic. I think it's a matter of controlling the infection so it doesn't spread and cause disease. Have hospital-derived superbugs lulled? I don't believe so. Daniel is always talking about, in fact, many COVID patients get bacteremias. So I don't think that's stopped at all. New York is the first city to require vaccination for gyms and restaurants now. Okay, here we from Peter. In the CDC report early in the pandemic, before masks, the positive rates ranged from 550 to 43 per 100K. This is one of the original variants. Delta is no worse. We do have audio here. Believe me, if I didn't have audio, people would tell me. People would tell me, as they often do, you're echoing. Delta plus is an additional amino acid change that was present in another variant, and at the moment it's not a worry. It doesn't seem to be outcompeting anything. Yeah, as Amy said, bowels are okay. You can get stuff from down in the lung, and look what's there. Are the mutations in the variants all in the spike or others? Oh, they're not all in the spike. They're in many other genes, but you wouldn't hear it because no one talks about them. Many others, in fact, and those could have real significance, but they're not being addressed. We're just focused on spike and antibodies against spike. Yeah, of course. Yeah, the media's already hyping it. That's what they do. Poor little mice. Yeah, I feel badly. They're very cute. And I feel badly, but I'm helping Amy, and so it has to be done. That's about the biggest animal I'll work on, though. And that's it. Yeah, no, you're right. Many news channels spread a lot of news, but so does nature. Yes, there's this article, how it infects and why it's so dangerous. Absolutely. They fall prey to the same thing. They're not working scientists. They are journalists. They are science writers. And so what do? They talk to people and they get the story from them. They talk to the same people that everyone else does. They get the same story. I agree. This article is frustrating for me to read because, again, they're not looking at the data. So, again, 75% of positive for vaccinated may have come from this study in Massachusetts. Positive, infected, yeah. You're not immune to infection if you're vaccinated. Absolutely. Neurobiologists use the Common Cold Project to support how viral load is insufficient to cause disease. Stress is required. Is this confirmed or denied in COVID? No, not even been looked at. For sure. Yes, a lot of doctors on the internet. On the internet, no one knows if you're a dog. And I mean by a dog, a woof woof, actually, right? Who knows? If a dog can type. There you go. What can local public health professionals do to unravel the mass confusion that exists about the virus, vaccines, and general population safety? Well, you could send them to TWIV. You could send them to Daniel Griffin's TWIV updates for a shorter version, or you could have them go to an ASV town hall. You can sign up and ask questions to a couple of experts. I'm going to do one next week. Any chance of a Twitter to do a short Q&A on our podcast to clear up Delta myths? You bet. Just shoot me an email, Vincent@microbe.tv. Absolutely. I know there are many people who listen to us. I just kind of say that rhetorically, right? Is there no routine monitoring to evaluate the relationship between PCR results and the quantity of virus that is replication competent? No, there is not. As I said, too hard. BSL-3 lab needed, too hard. If it were BSL-2, we would be doing it more, for sure. But no, Doug, we are not doing that, and that's part of the problem. Yes, you should do your rapid antigen tests. Yep. Check yourself periodically. It's a great way. That's what they're doing in the UK, right? They give them out. I'm not sure why you say not to test vaccinated individuals. I don't think this Singapore study showed relevant transmission, frankly. I don't think vaccinated people transmit. If you want to find that out, then that would be a reason to do it. But if you just want to know if people are infected after vaccination, that's a waste of time because the vaccine is not preventing infection. A transmission study is another thing, but that's very hard to do. CDC does need some assistance from virologists, but they don't reach out to people who are outside their working group. So that's the way it is. isn't that what the UK is doing, testing? Yeah, they give out the antigen tests, and people can, who are vaccinated, they can, if they get a little cough, they can check, and they may find they're infected. But as I say, these vaccines are clearly allowing infection. They're allowing mild infections to occur in most cases. So the question is, should you be quarantining yourself if you are positive then and even vaccinated? So, in the absence of any data on infectivity, as I said, this New England Journal paper, over half of the vaccinated PCR positive people did not have antigen. That means the virus is not reproducing in them. I don't think they're transmitting. I think we need more data on this to guide people as to whether they should quarantine. If they're fully vaccinated and positive, are you going to transmit or not? We don't really have guidance on that. You just have hearsay, and it's not good. Long COVID and breakthroughs, no. Daniel was saying last week we need some data, and we don't have it yet. Do you think vaccine makers can keep up and get in front of emerging variants? I don't think they need to. I think the vaccines will handle. And if they need to make a new one for some other variant, then they can do it quite rapidly in a few weeks, for sure. Did we? Oh, we're at 600. Well, we had 700 now, right? That's a first. And by the way, we passed 90,000 subscribers this week. So that's pretty good. Thanks. So they tick up, every few days, 100, 200, 300. I'm very impressed that people want to listen. So it's great. Yes, we have to do something when we hit 100K for sure. Absolutely. We'll do something online, and we'll give out prizes. Yeah. Thank you, Chavis, for your contribution. Can you elaborate on Epstein-Barr and COVID vaccines? Well, an original antigenic sin and COVID vaccines. It's a lot of things to elaborate on. EBV, I don't know exactly what you have in mind, but we're all infected with EBV, and I'm not sure the relationship you're looking for with COVID vaccines. Now, original antigenic sin is something that we have understood from influenza virus, and that is that when you're vaccinated or infected, you make a really strong response to whatever the first influenza virus that you were infected with in your life. So if you're infected in 1918 with an H1N1 and then you get infected in 1968 with an H3N2, you're going to make largely an H1N1 response. And I don't see any evidence of that for COVID. However, it is true that if you recover from infection and then you get one dose of vaccine, you get an incredibly broad response that encompasses all the variants. And that's a great reason for recovered people to be vaccinated, because you're set. You really have good protection against all the current variants. I received one dose of AZ and one of Moderna. You're great. You're protected. That's a good combination, absolutely. My daughter's getting married after the event was postponed. The reception is indoors. We're considering renting a tent and bring it outside. If the weather's good, I would do that, yeah. Because even if everyone's vaccinated, there may still be a transmission event, and people, as Daniel Griffin said, I'm vaccinated. I might get mild COVID, but I don't want any COVID. And so you might want to do that. Is the affinity of the IgG formed from the vaccine towards the Delta the same as the original? So no, it has reduced neutralization ability for sure. And of course, it depends on what study you look at, but it's reduced a little bit or a lot. But the antibody doesn't matter as much. First of all, we don't even know what level of antibody is important for protection, right? We don't know that number. There's no standardized neutralization test that we could use to decide. And then it's quite clear that even with reduced neutralization, you're still protected against severe disease, probably by the T cells, contrary to what Eric Topol says. So there you have it. Yes, lighting is the lab. I could get her a nice light for the table. I could probably do that to fill in some of the shadows. I agree with that. Yep. Is it possible that Israel started vaccinating early account for the discrepancy? I don't think so. Why would that make a difference? You think the protection is waning, but that shouldn't make a difference. The memory response should be kicking right in. But there obviously is some difference, right? Barry Garrett predicted this pandemic would last for 3 years. So we're in the second year now, right? Yeah, I think it's going to go 3 years. I think that's correct. 3 years. But if you're vaccinated, I think you're better off, right? How fast do antibodies get produced when vaccinated people get challenged? Within a few days, your memory response kicks in, both antibody and T cells. So it's enough to prevent spread within you, and it's enough to prevent transmission. Amy, do you think any of your work contributed to the creation of the mRNA vaccine? I think Amy would say no. The mRNA vaccine technology goes way, way back before COVID vaccines, right? You know that. It wasn't invented by the current developers. It was long before, including the lady at UPenn whose name escapes me. She was an original developer, but then the whole ability to make mRNA in vitro from plasmids and transcription, that was developed separately by other people. So a lot of it fed into it. What do you think about San Francisco's decision to offer mRNA vaccines to J&J? I don't think you need it, but it doesn't hurt. Okay, Amy has just left now, and according to the chat. You'll be teaching face-to-face in a Florida State College where masks and vaccine is not mandated. Would I teach in such conditions? So Columbia is requiring vaccine, but not masking. I think that's fine. I think vaccination, and I will be teaching in person next semester. I'm sorry, in Florida, masks are not mandated. Vaccine is not even mandated. That's a problem. And you are in the age group where you are more likely to have more severe disease after being vaccinated. We're seeing that, right? Not a lot, but it's there. So I don't know what you can do, though. You need to work, right? Well, you could wear a mask. That would help. How did Michael Minnis screw up the liquor sticks? I don't know. I haven't talked to him since we had him on Twiv. They just didn't show up, right? Is vaccinated antibodies response faster than 4 days into challenge? I think so. I think it's 2 to 3 days. Yeah, but not immediate, so that's why you can get infected. Let's see here. What else do we have? It is almost 10 o'clock, and we still have over 700 people. Actually, the number's gone up. What is it? People are night owls, and they show up? What's the end game for SARS without vaccination? Eventually, it would spread through most unvaccinated people. It may take a few years to do that, though. It's not going to happen in the next 6 months. A lot of those people will die, right? Especially older people. But eventually, eventually most of the population would be immune. So that's how I think the other common cold coronaviruses ended up. Does fever mitigate? That's interesting. Does fever mitigate SARS-CoV-2 infection? Probably does to a certain extent, but I don't think it helps enough because many people have fevers and have disseminated, not disseminated, have severe infections. So I don't think that really helps. Please repost the earliest TWIVs. They're all up there. They're still posted. They're still posted. do people with chronic infection act as an accelerator for variants? So that was the original idea, that people who are infected for many months, people who don't have a good immune response, they're infected for months at a time, they're given monoclonal therapy, and so that may be a breeding ground for selection. But it's a theory, but not ever proven. And there's so few of those people that I'm not sure that that's the answer. Thank you, Tom, for your contribution. Appreciate it. This bit where I described SEMN needs to be clipped. That was awesome. I don't even remember what I did, but go ahead and clip it. RDRP is the key. I think it's a great target. Now, if Amy were here, she would say, no, it's the protease. But I do. You know, the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase is the most conserved protein among all RNA viruses. Among all RNA viruses. Thank you, Steph, for your contribution. Appreciate it. Appreciate not only your contribution, but all of you coming out here once a week. I'm amazed that you still stick with it. Can mask wearing mitigate infection by warming the upper tract? No, I don't think so. I think there's insignificant warming, but I don't think that would mitigate the infection either. Can vaccines cause reactivation of dormant viruses? No. The COVID vaccines? No, they do not. Okay, let's see. I hope you're aware of the fact that stuff from your Peter Daszak interview have been used. Yeah, I'm aware of that. But you know what? They got it wrong. Not that it matters, right? Because people don't know that. But yeah, they got it all wrong. Are there variant cross-infections between hospitalized patients? It could be. In areas where multiple variants are circulating. In fact, there's some evidence for recombination already. Mainstream media is still confused with strains of variants. Well, there's one strain so far. Only one. No other variant has been shown to have a unique biological property. And so they're all variants. And, you know, calling them variants of concern, I think, was a good thing because it got people to use the word variants. But, yeah, they're not going to get it. Any particular reason for posting the Singapore interview in May? Okay, so here's what happened. I went to Singapore in December. I would have posted it within a few weeks. Boom! COVID hit the beginning of January, and we didn't do anything else for months. That's why it was posted in May. Nothing nefarious. I'm the least nefarious person in the world. If you've had the Rona and mask up, still be fine. You should get a dose of vaccine. You'll be even finer. That's a good question, Ro. When they say 35,000 breakthrough infections per week, what are they talking about? Let's see if I can find that here. They are symptomatic infections. Okay? Symptomatic is what it says. If you're fully vaccinated with antibodies, how can you still get sick? Antibodies and T cells, don't forget them, right? Because no vaccine is 100% protective against you getting sick. It's not 100%, and that's it. So you're in the percentage that are good. So some people don't respond as well as others to the vaccine. They don't make a good response that is protective. The population is heterogeneous, and so that's part of it. You know, when you immunize 100 people, not all of them make a protective immune response. We know that because of the outbred nature of humans, right? Yeah, the stuff from Daszak is being misused. What can I do? What can I do? I think it's a good interview, and I had him back twice more. Thank you, Ro. I answered your question, I believe. Any insight into why Lambda may be evading the vaccine? I'm not sure it's evading the vaccine. I think that remains to be sorted out. Thank you, Andrew, for your support of the Incubator. Oh, this is a good question. Well, they're all good. Do you think it will be difficult to predict the appropriate strains to include in the flu vaccine since there was very little circulation? I think it will be harder, but there was enough circulation. They may decide not to change it because there's been very little variant antigenic drift this year, so that'll be interesting to find out. That's a good question. I was just going to say, we just passed 300 likes. Thank you, folks. It's very nice of all of you. And I'm spinning down here to try and get through. A lot of the questions are repeated. A lot of them, if the U.S. had a public health service, it wouldn't be a political issue. That's right. We don't. We don't have one that has any authority, right? Because the states are all basically independent countries. They do what they want. And, yeah, it's too bad. Now, other countries do better for sure. Why is BSL-3 required when the virus is common? Well, because it's hard to reverse it, in fact. West Nile is a BSL-3, and it was never reversed, even though it shouldn't be a BSL-3. You have to appeal to the CDC, and they don't like to reverse these things. So I don't think it'll ever be reversed. You heard of TWIB before COVID because of the YouTube virology course. Great. You should, if you haven't listened to it, go listen to the virology course. You can listen to it at your leisure, right? And I think I've been doing it for 12 years. I got better at it, and I think that you'll learn a lot from it. And as I said, if you want to hear it in a live stream, I'm going to do an experiment in September. I'm going to live stream the course twice a week, and you'll be able to ask questions. We'll see if that works. And if that works, that's the introductory course. Then I'll do, say, a course on an emerging viruses, right? Where we go over all the emerging viruses and where they came from, and that should be fun. And then maybe a course on specific viruses. All this can be done from the Incubator with your support. Because it costs money to do that, and I don't want to make any money on it. I just want to get the information out there. Is it inevitable that unvaccinated people will contract? I think so, unless you're living in a very remote part of the world. You take notes. That's great. It's great. I love it. Would I teach face-to-face at a college that doesn't require masks or vaccinated? If I could stand 20 feet away from the front of the class, I would, yeah, because I think that's far enough distance. But most classrooms are not that big. And if they said you can't have a job unless you do, I would do it to keep my job. But I don't want you to get sick, Charlotte. Why am I avoiding ivermectin comment? I think if you want to use ivermectin, you're welcome to. There's a clinical trial ongoing, a large one, randomized controlled clinical trial, which will really get to the bottom of it. But as you know, a lot of people use it. They think it works. And the results so far have been mixed. So I have no reason to say don't use it. But I think we do need a clinical trial to investigate it. Could nucleoside analogs backfire? So remdesivir wasn't used all that much, right? So we don't get much resistance. But if we had something like molnupiravir, which could be orally taken by anyone, then you would get resistance within 6 months, and it wouldn't work anymore. So we need more than one. We need more than one antiviral, for sure. Can you combine Pfizer and Moderna? Sure, absolutely. They are basically this, very similar. Not the same, but they're very similar. So you could do that. Sinopharm. I haven't seen a lot of data I don't think it's as effective as Pfizer and Moderna. But as Daniel Griffin says, you should take the vaccine that's available because it's better than no vaccine. You can always get a booster later on if you'd like. Is an antiviral useful if symptoms don't start till replication peaks? No, it's exactly right, Barry. That's not useful unless you catch people really early before by the time you are just into the symptomatic phase, the virus is declining, so it's really too late. So no, you'd have to do testing every 3 days. The first test positive, start taking an antiviral for it to make any difference. And that's the problem. That is the problem. Have you seen anything about mouthwash? Yes, so it does reduce load, but the problem is if you're in the active phase of viral reproduction, it comes right back. So it's really only a transient effect. Now, dentist offices do use that, right? The last time I went to the dentist, I had to gargle for 30 minutes, and that probably keeps the viral load down for enough time for them to do their work. But it's not going to last forever, right? How do you get to my virology course? Well, you're here on YouTube, right? You found me, youtube.com/PROFVRR, and they're there. They're right there from this year. Where do you get the book? Amazon has it. But, I'm not, you don't need to get the book to learn the virology from the course. And the course is free right now. So check out the free virology course. I recently heard the FDA is retracting the EUA because it could not differentiate. I hadn't heard that at all. If you're a Columbia student, can we get credit for attending your lectures? I don't think you can get credit for the live stream. It's not a Columbia course, but you can, if you're a Columbia student, take the course in the spring. I'm there every spring. And now we're talking about virology. People love it, and it's great. Yeah, it's free. Someone told me COVID can cause epigenetic changes. No, it does not cause genetic or epigenetic changes. There's no evidence for that. That's another rumor that people make. And, people say, oh, it sounds plausible, but it's wrong. No. It's wrong. Would there be some kind of drug therapy for people with long COVID? A vaccine that tells the immune system to turn itself off. So, as you know, about 30% of people with long COVID, after being vaccinated, feel that some of their symptoms subside. So maybe it's a matter of resetting the immune system. Yes. So it could be that some drug could do that. Maybe not one, but multiple. So I think you're on the right track for sure. Why is there the thought that some people with type O are less likely to get? So early on in the pandemic, there were some suggestions that people with type O were less likely to get severely ill, but on further examination, it was shown not to be correct. So there's no relationship. Yes, some parasites have remained highly virulent for many years. Absolutely. So the idea that everything goes to a virulence is not true. And it may not even be all viruses. As I said, it's a hypothesis, and it makes a lot of sense, but there's very little proof for it. So one might think that a virus that isn't particularly virulent is under no pressure to evolve more or less. Yes. So you have to ask, what would be the pressure for a virus to become more virulent? Because this is what people talk about all the time with these variants, becoming more virulent. I don't think there's any pressure for being more virulent, unless it's driven by transmission, which is maybe you need higher virus shedding to transmit better, and that higher virus production could cause more disease, so it could make you more virulent, right? So that's kind of a side effect of another selection pressure. But selection just for virulence makes no sense to me, unless it's connected to something else. But less virulence would make sense if you're dying before you can transmit, right? Now, Ebola kills you very rapidly, but it's kind of an artificial situation because In the hospital, people take care of you. At home, people take care of you, and they get infected by very close contact. So our behaviors can override these evolutionary considerations. Yes, the virus in the resistant rabbits is still deadly to others. That's right. Did the rabbit mix though become less virulent, or were the rabbits just less susceptible? Both. Both happened. They've both been studied. Both ends of the equation have been studied. And both things happened. That's right. Would we be able to predict virulence in future viruses by studying data from the pandemic? I think if it's a different virus, all bets are off. No. Other coronas, maybe, if we can get patterns of what changed and what it meant. But, boy, that's going to be a problem. Does vaccination lead to herd immunity? It does. And the number you need depends on the reproductive index. So for SARS-CoV-2, it's 70%-ish, right? And so we're not there yet. And we would see a gradual decline as we approach it. But 70 to 80%, I think, is the key. But we're not there. Is Chinese funding present at the college you work at? No, not that I'm aware of. Is vaccinating coronavirus reservoirs bats a viable solution? Unfortunately, bats are too numerous to be able to vaccinate. Now, what you're suggesting, immunizing wildlife, has in fact been done. And you can, for example, drop bait with rabies vaccine into the woods from helicopters. And the animals, raccoons and whatever else is in the woods, will eat it and get vaccinated. And it does bring down rabies in areas where that's been done. But I think the bats would be, how would you do that? They're not going to eat anything you throw on the ground, right? And you can't go and vaccinate them. So, but we can vaccinate other kinds of animals to prevent spillover. For example, we can vaccinate the camels in the Arabian Peninsula and prevent MERS coronavirus infections of humans because that's where it comes from. That's a brilliant solution, right? There are too few MERS-CoV cases to vaccinate people, but all the camels are infected. It's called a One Health solution. Also, Hendra virus from Australia. The virus goes from bats to horses and then to people. You vaccinate the horses, mainly because the racehorses are really expensive. You don't want them to die. You vaccinate the horses, you protect people. One Health solution. I really like that. I really like that. Here in my hometown, I'm hearing more of people that are testing positive with symptoms after being vaccinated. Yes, I think they're mostly mild symptoms. As I said, these vaccines turn out to allow infection, as most other vaccines do, but also a mild illness. And it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. We don't understand why, and maybe we can sort it out at some point, but for now, that's what we're going to have to live with. There is a recent launch of a home qualitative PCR product here that includes an instrument in the test cartridges. Do you think that's good? It all comes down to, why do you want to know if you're infected unless you have symptoms, right? If you've been fully vaccinated, we don't have good evidence that you can transmit, and you can't do a study on transmission in your home. So I think maybe for unvaccinated people it would be good, right? Because then if you get infected, you can quarantine. Can humans infect cats and dogs? Yes. And by the way, did you hear recently, we now know that wild deer are infected with SARS-CoV-2. So that's an interesting point. Where did they get it from, right? I would guess that they got it from rodents somehow. Not from people, because, I have a lot of deer on my property, and I can't even get close to them. So I can't get within 6 feet of the deer on my property, so they didn't get it from me. So they must have gotten it from other rodents in the woods, which means that rodents are infected. So, boy, this is really infecting a lot of other things. So anyway, cats and dogs, this is not fake news. It is true. Only 20% of cases in vaccinated people are infectious. So I don't even know if that's correct, because they're using PCR, and they don't. How can you say about infectivity unless you're using an infectious assay, right? PCR doesn't measure infectivity. No, 70%. We didn't reach 70% yet. No way. No way. Vaccinated, 50%, right? And I'm not sure how many have been infected. I think we have a big underestimate, at least fivefold of how many people have been infected. Well, I answered your question. So how college funding works, we have to write grants to the NIH to support our research. The college that I work at doesn't support our research. They don't even pay all my salary. They pay a part of it, and then I have to raise the rest on research grants, and it isn't very much. I'm just a teacher. You think the models take human behavior, but they get it pathetically wrong. Okay. I don't think they all take it into account, but that's fine if it's pathetically wrong. No, the U.S. is not at 70%. I could be wrong. Let's look it up right now. U.S. COVID vaccination percent, because I follow a few sites that have the tracker. 57% have received one dose. 49% have been fully vaccinated. So, see, don't listen to the news. Gosh, 70%. It's not right. Maybe with one, it's not even 70. It's approaching 70, right? And it's not hard to find out. You just need to know the sources to look at, right? Legitimizes. That was the word I was looking for. Yes, thank you. About a half hour afterwards. You know, it's interesting. I'm going way over here. I'm going to stop at 10:30, I think. But the numbers go up and down. They go down to 7:10. Now they're up at 7:40. It's pretty cool. People come and go. They come and they go, this is garbage. I don't want to hear about this. I would rather go look at music or something or sports. That's fine. And that's what we compete against, right? Science teachers. His safe experiment to measure if people have a PCR positive person cough on a mink or ferret. Well, you know, it's not really scientific, right? But I understand your humor. Can mutations in spike, that would be amino acid changes, cause differences in replication numbers? What do you mean? You mean reproductive index in people? It could, but hasn't been shown. What would be the mechanism? It could be immune evasion. That's most likely. Could be better replication, better fitness, but we don't know. Is a strong immune system, no comorbidities, better than a vaccine? No. It will not prevent infection, and so the vaccine is really going to be necessary in this case. Is COVID airborne? Is there a transmission difference observed? You mean, is there a difference in the size of the particles that are transmitting between the variants? No. Not been looked at, as far as I know. Now, you know, we have some anecdotal data which says people walk by each other in a hall and they infect each other. And I criticized that a few weeks ago. And I got a lot of emails saying, these are reputable people saying that. I don't care. They cannot possibly prove that these two people walking by each other infected each other. It just can't be. They don't have the data. So I don't think that there's any evidence on that question. Thank you for your contribution. We're having an epidemiologist on Tuesday. Jeff Shaman is coming back. He already told me there's definitely more transmission, and I want to know why he thinks so. I'll keep an open mind. Thank you, Frank. He's gone already, but thank you for moderating tonight. And I think Vanity Nutrition is still here. I appreciate it. I'm sorry to keep you up. Just another 10 minutes. I want to get through as much of this as I can. Thank you for your contribution. 80% vaccinated is too low. Well, we don't vaccinate anywhere near that for influenza, so I'm not sure that's a good comparison. I think 80% would suffice, but we'll see. I mean, if, in fact, the R naught is 8, then we need more than 80%. I need 1 minus 1 over the R naught or something like that, and you could figure it out. Isn't fit problematic because it implies some intrinsic property? Well, yes, that's exactly why I use fit, because I think how else do you explain that a variant displaces another one? It's more fit than the other one, survival of the fittest, right? So it has some intrinsic property that makes it outcompete in a population. So I think that's correct. But what makes it more fit, we don't know. We have to do the experiments to figure that out. And I think that would be really interesting to do. So that's why I think it's okay. You think we'll never get to 80%? Maybe not. But maybe through infection we will, right? If you had 100% of the U.S. vaccinated, would it go away? No, it's still going to be around. It's in animals, right? And then they will give it back to us. And then some of these people may have small amounts of virus that will perpetuate it. So no, it'll never go away. It's always going to be here. But what we want to do is keep as many people out of the hospital as possible. Thank you, Ditching. Really appreciate your support. Yeah, and The Band Played On is a quite good book also. I like that as well. Do I think flu will come back with a vengeance? I think we're going to have a big flu season this fall, yeah, because we haven't had the population immunity generated in the past year from influenza, right? So, yeah, I do think when everybody gets together, it's flu season, the weather chills, yeah. Do we have any idea how COVID affects long-term neurological function? Well, we don't, and we had a neurologist on TWIV on Friday who talked about that, and she speculated that, it has to do with inflammatory damage and perhaps hypoxia and so forth, but no one really knows. More cancers because people avoided screening. Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. That's a good point. Thank you, Diana, for your contribution. Really appreciate it. Why does it take so long? Someone told me that they want to observe the vaccinees for 2 years to see how long immunity lasts. That's why the phase 3 typically takes 2 years. And that's really the only thing that's holding up the licensure, according to Paul Offit, who knows about that. Thank you, Marge, for your contribution. I really appreciate it. Why can't they issue a EUA for boosters? So the FDA doesn't think they're needed yet. And they told Pfizer, for example, we're not going to EUA it yet because we don't think we need it. My anti-vax friends are asking why Israel is considering a lockdown if the vaccine works. Well, I think that's not really needed because they have most of the population immunized, and I think their data are not correct. Immunized, that slide I showed you is at odds with what's being seen in other countries, so there's something different there. I'm not sure why, and I would just tell them that's not the experience of other countries, what they're seeing in Israel. Thank you, Corey, for your contribution. Fauci now says he fears vaccine-resistant variants could emerge. No, I think he's wrong. I don't know where he's getting this from. I don't know why you would even say that. That further discourages people from getting vaccinated, right? It's not going to encourage people to get vaccinated. Dr. Fauci mentioned on TWIV, he mentioned a study, HEROES, that looked at kids in transmission. Well, that's an older study. I don't know if that was ongoing when he was on TWIV, and I don't know what the story is, but Daniel Griffin and I talk tomorrow, so I will ask him. How can we be sure of vaccine efficacy? Because those kind of studies are being done, not the kind of studies Amy didn't bemoaned are the lab studies that are trying to get at the properties of the virus. But vaccine efficacy you do in populations, and those are being done quite a bit. Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate your nice comments. What's the difference between a restaurant and a bus or a car? Well, you have to wear masks on buses and cars also, subway cars. I take the subway every day. Masks are required. I take New Jersey Transit. Masks are required. So it's all consistent, I think. Yeah. Yeah, you have to be masked on the train. You have to unmask to eat. That's absolutely sure. But when you get there, you have to take it off to eat. That's right. Why are patients who have recovered from COVID they're not being ignored? We recognize that they've recovered. They have good immune systems that didn't make them sick. Remember, only a fraction gets severe COVID and dies, and it's mostly age-related. Some young people can, but many people recover. And this is a burning question. People are trying to understand what makes people get severe disease. So they're not being ignored. They're part of big studies where they compare their genome with that of people who get severe disease, for sure. There's a fundamentally different point of view between public health and research virologists. Absolutely, Cameron. You're absolutely right. Couldn't have put it better. There's Vanity. She's still here. Thank you. Sorry to keep you up so late. Sorry to keep you up. See, now we're at 7:47, the big plane for Daniel. So the public health message has a different context with virologists. They are bound to be different, but it doesn't help when people jump on public health. It sows doubt. I understand. The problem is, Neil, you get vaccinated, you wear a mask, no matter what the variant is doing, okay? It's no different today as it was a while ago. And it would be different if we had more people vaccinated. That's the way I look at it. So I agree with you, but in fact, it doesn't make any difference. And if you think if you can pass in a hallway and get infected, then you're just wrong. Not you, but in general, right? What is it that they measure in wastewater surveillance? My daughter insists that it's because of vaccinated people. No, the vaccine doesn't end up in your poop or urine and get into the wastewater. What gets in there is virus that's infecting your lung, and you swallow it, and it goes through your digestive tract and is excreted. So they're measuring the wild infectious, not virus, but they're measuring the nucleic acids by PCR. So we did a TWIV on that with the people in New York City who were involved in that. It's a very good indicator of what's going on in the community, because people poop out virus, parts of viruses, not infectious virus. I had COVID a year ago. Do you recommend getting the vaccine? I do, because it really boosts your immunity through to all the variants. So absolutely, Carlos, get a booster. Can the virus spread through feces? There's zero evidence. Now, it's present there in the sewage, but it's not infectious as far as I know. Can you do a Q&A while drinking heavily? I can't drink heavily anymore. I'm too old. I have a limit, and I don't feel like drinking anymore. But I could drink 2 glasses of wine if you'd like. I want to do a live event in New York one day, too. And I'd love to travel to other cities where people have been listening and do live events. I think it would be fun. That would be a blast, right? I'm having a debate. I believe it's only a matter of time until a variant emerges that can significantly resist the vaccine. He disagrees, as there's no evidence of that. Well, there's no evidence of a vaccine that completely, a variant that completely evades the vaccine yet. That's true. Is it going to happen? Well, I think the T cells are not ever evaded, right? Because it's only the antibody binding to the spike that's evaded by variants. So I don't think there will ever be a variant that evades the vaccine, because the T cell epitopes do not change in variants. And that's a fact. Yes, the lady at UPenn is from Racaniello Rush. Yes, she's great. And she was the first to think up mRNA vaccines. Absolutely. So UMB in Boston is wearing masks. Okay, That's interesting. So Colombia may end up requiring masks. They're making a decision now. If you want to get a third shot, it's not harmful at all. At this point, I don't think you need it, but you can go ahead and do it. Ian, thank you so much for your support. Always appreciate your contributions. And let's see, we should wind up. I've kept you all too long. We're still at 740 strong. Someone said, just keep going until everyone disappears. What's the probability of getting the common cold while being vaccinated? Well, it depends on whether it's circulating, right? Because there are times where it's not in certain locales. But if, in fact, common cold viruses are circulating, there are a bunch of them, you could get a COVID vaccine and then suddenly get symptoms that may seem to you like COVID, but it's a common cold. So yes, absolutely. Thank you, Diana, for your contribution. And thank you for your weekly sessions of dragging epidemiologists. I don't mean to drag them. They think differently about things. I'm having one on the show next week. Catalin Carico, that's it. Thank you very much. She did the incorporation of pseudouridine into mRNA, which is really an important advance. If the vaccines aren't reactivating old viruses, how do you explain the herpes and shingles flare-ups in people who get vaccines? Okay, so you didn't say those particular viruses. You said all viruses. But yeah, so we all have latent viruses in us. And stress can reactivate them. Certainly for herpes and shingles, which is also a herpes virus, they can be activated by stress. So where does the stress come from the vaccine? You get your immune response is stressing you. You get a fever. You get cytokines produced. So yeah, that could reactivate it. I have no problem with that. But your original question sounded like it's reactivating all viruses. But those are very specific latent viruses that get reactivated by stress. Yeah, absolutely. Looks like Vanity is selling some books. Absolutely. Thank you, Brian, for your contribution for the studio. Old Phil Collins song? Really? Studio? I didn't know that. I think Phil Collins was good. Oh, why did they skip animal trials? They didn't. They did those first before it went into phase 1. Absolutely. For the original vaccines, they went into animals, preclinical first. Yep. Was ADE involved in prior coronavirus vaccine experiments? There was some ADE in mice, correct, but never in any humans. And as you know, mice lie and monkeys exaggerate. I think, James, you might have heard by now what ADE is, antibody-dependent enhancement. Like you said, when you get science and politics, you get politics, right? When you mix them. I keep seeing a questionable claim that the virus was never isolated. Well, that's totally wrong. Here's what they did. You know, my virology students would know this because I teach them in the second lecture, right? Vanity nutrition. They took one of the first patients with pneumonia in Wuhan. They did a bowel. They put fluid into their lungs. They took it out. They threw it on cells. The cells developed cytopathic effects. They looked at it under the EM. They saw virus particles. They took the supernatant, put it on new cells. It infected them. They sequenced it. They got SARS-CoV-2. Anyone who says it was never isolated simply is lying or doesn't know what the data mean. That's one thing they have certainly done. They haven't gotten rid of it. But, so we're going to have at least one person in the virology course in December. Excellent. No, you don't have to call him a dumbass. I think it's not good to call people names just because he thinks that hydroxychloroquine is good. You could just point them to information which says it can't possibly work in people because hydroxychloroquine inhibits an internal uncoating of the virus, and in lung cells, it just uncoats at the surface. It gets around the hydroxychloroquine block, and that's why it failed. Not a problem. Yes, this has been mentioned by other people. Gaps in vaccination might have made a difference in the Israeli data, for sure. Okay, now I really need to get to the end because I feel bad that I'm keeping you here, actually. It's not even me. I just feel bad that I'm keeping you up late, especially Vanity. Thank you, Ro. I appreciate it. Intranasal vaccine is going to be a while. It's really not close to coming out, unfortunately. But it probably will still be needed. Phil, as an EMT, I thank you. Thank you so much, Phil, and thank you for your work. It's really appreciated. Thank you, Neil, for your contribution. Really appreciate it. That's right. Virus titers are down by the time the symptoms starts. You're absolutely right. Do you take suggestions for TWIV guests? I do. His thoughts on misinformation. Can monoclonals be used similar to HIV PrEP for the people who refuse vaccine? So monoclonals can be used for prophylaxis, but they don't last more than a few months, maybe up to a year for the one, what is it, GSK, I believe. So you have to keep getting it over and over. All right, let's see where the last super chats are here. And we can thank them and then say good night. There are lots of good comments and questions. I hate to skip over them, but we have to do it. Thank you, Vanity. Thank you, Mark, for your contribution. Split a pizza with Amy. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Vanity. I really appreciate it. You're staying here. Let's get Bollinger to pay us more. No, there's no way he's going to pay us more. He'll say, I have thousands of faculty I have to take care of. Vincent is nothing special. Thank you, Hebrew Barrister, for your contribution. Likely that 2 different brand home rapid tests taken over 2 days on a mild symptomatic but confirmed exposed child could get false negatives. No. So remember, not every infected person transmits. Only about 20% of them. So it's very possible. I've heard many stories like this of people who know they were in contact with an infected shedding person and they test negative. They're lucky. They just got lucky. I'm not sure Alpha was more fit, just lucky. It could have been in the right place at the right time. That's right. And it's the same for D614G. That's right. Why aren't they testing birds and fish? Well, I don't know that they aren't. Birds especially, right? I think they probably are testing many animals, and we'll be hearing about those on TWIV for sure. And you guys are having a great chat amongst yourselves. That's great. Overjoyed, thank you so much. I appreciate your support and being here a lot. Whatever happened to that vaccine that used a structural part of the virus that would be universal? Now you're talking about SARS-CoV-2? Well, we don't have a universal vaccine. We have some hints about what we might need. Perhaps you're thinking of the receptor binding domain of spike, which seems to give rise to broadly neutralizing antibodies. That's going to be a ways off. Yeah, for sure. Michael, thank you for your contribution. Really appreciate it. I will be here every week as long as you want it. Yeah, we went up to 750 tonight, or 747, 750, yeah. Absolutely. What do you say to those who say the vaccine is experimental? Well, it's your choice, right? But it's not experimental for sure because it went through everything except the 2-year longevity study, which is really only saying how long it will last. So it's not experimental. It's been in many, many hundreds of millions of people. And so it is absolutely fine to take. And if you want to take your chance, the problem is even if you get a mild infection, you may have long COVID and feel crappy the rest of your life. And if you think that's worth it, then do it. Can I get Fauci and Minna? Okay, we could do that at some point. Amy will not be happy about either one, I think. If you catch COVID, recover. Can you die if you catch it again? Unlikely. You get reasonable protection. Which will we get to first, 100,000 subs or 1,000 viewers on a live Twix? And now we went below 7 because people are going to bed. We could get to 1,000 first probably, but the reason it's high this week is because of the news cycle. And next week, if there's no news cycle, we won't do as well. But that's fine because I'd be able to answer more of your questions. All right, everyone's going to bed. Thank you for your super chat. Thank you. Some of us are in time zone where it's not late. At some point, I'd like to hear suggestions for what time of day, Eastern, you would like to have a live stream virology course. I don't want to have it, too early for the West Coast and too late for other parts of the world. What's this that I'm wearing? Oh, this is a silver bracelet that my wife gave me ages ago. She bought it at Tiffany's. It was on sale for $50. She bought it, and I've worn it every day because I like it. It's different, right? It just has a thing that you slip it off there. It's not health or anything, no. It's just she gave it to me, and I like it. Okay, I'm going to skip over everything and say goodnight to all of you. Thank you so much for coming and asking great questions. I'll be back next week. See you then. Have a good week and be safe.